Hello and welcome. The world's power dynamics are shifting in a really big way. And right at the heart of this change is a pretty bold move by French President Emmanuel Macron, a plan that could completely redraw the map of global alliances.
So, when the French president says this, it's not just a passing comment. This single idea, this diagnosis, is what's driving a really radical new way of thinking about geopolitics. He sees a problem, and he thinks he has found a solution. All right, so let's get into this idea of a world fragmenting. What does that actually look like? Well, it's a growing divide, a chasm, that could define how countries deal with each other for years to come. Let's break it down. You can see this divide most clearly between two powerful groups. On one side, you have the G7, which is basically the club of traditional Western allies, and on the other, you have the BRICS nations, a real powerhouse of emerging economies. Now, President Macron's whole argument is that for the world to have any kind of stability, these two blocs have to stop seeing each other as rivals. So you have to ask, what's driving this split? Well, the main catalyst is widely seen as the America First policy of the Trump administration. The thing is, this approach hasn't just created friction with adversaries, it's also strained relationships with some of America's closest, most traditional allies. And look, these points of tension are very specific, and they're quite serious. European leaders are really frustrated by what they're calling American trade coercion. We've even seen these incredible disputes over sovereignty, like the U.S. showing interest in buying Greenland. When you add to that a feeling that the U.S. president sees global summits as a waste of time, you can start to understand why Europe is looking for new alliances away from Washington. So in response to this fracturing world, Macron has put forward a truly audacious gambit. It's a direct attempt to build a new kind of consensus and really steer the world in a new direction. Okay, so what is the proposal? Well, in short, it's to build a bridge. Macron has called for a key nation to step up and act as a connector between the Western-led G7 and the emerging economies of the BRICS. The goal here is to start a new kind of conversation, to get past the current rivalry and deadlock. But this is where it gets really interesting, because while Macron keeps talking about the G7, what he seems to be proposing is a G7 without the United States, a G6, if you like. Now, why would he do that? Well, it's a practical move. The current U.S. administration has been openly hostile to the BRICS nations, even threatening massive tariffs. So including them just might not work. This idea hasn't just come out of nowhere. It's actually deeply rooted in a long-standing French foreign policy idea called strategic autonomy. For decades, France has been pushing this vision of Europe as a sovereign, independent global power, one that can act on its own terms without always relying on the United States. Now, this brings us to the most important question. If you're going to build a bridge, who can you trust to be the keystone? In Macron's strategic vision, one nation really stands out as the perfect candidate to connect these two worlds. So the big question is, why India? What is it about India that makes it the linchpin in such a delicate and ambitious global plan? Well, the answer really lies in India's unique position on the world stage today. The answer, for Macron, seems to be India, and the reason is that India holds this very unique position. It's trusted by the West, and it's also trusted by the global South. And believe me, that's a rare thing in today's polarized world. This dual trust is what makes it the ideal candidate, at least in the eyes of European strategists, to mediate between these powerful blocs. But let's be realistic. Proposing an alliance like this is one thing, but actually achieving it is something else entirely. The path forward is filled with some major challenges, even as the push for it gets more serious. And we have to be very clear about the major obstacles here. There are still deep divisions. The conflict in Ukraine, for example, puts European G7 nations directly at odds with the positions of several BRICS members. And on top of that, you have profound disagreements over China's growing assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific. These are not small issues. They are fundamental sticking points. Of course, you can't ignore the domestic politics of it all. Some analysts suggest that President Macron is playing a long game here. By positioning himself as a global leader who can forge a new world order, he might also be looking to boost his own approval ratings back home in France. So, despite all these massive challenges and complex motivations, there is one key factor that is powerfully pushing all of these different countries towards cooperation. It's a single, overarching reason that's making the unthinkable seem more and more possible. And what is that one factor? It's been called the Trump factor. The perceived unpredictability of American foreign policy is so powerful that it's pushing nations from Europe all the way to the global South to consider alliances that were once completely unthinkable. All of a sudden, a shared need for stability is starting to become more important than even the deepest disagreements. And so, this leaves us with a final, really thought-provoking question. As all the old certainties of the post-Cold War era seem to be dissolving, are we watching the birth of a new world order? Maybe one that isn't born from shared values or some grand design, but one that's being forged out of pure geopolitical necessity.